what are the keys for Mississippi State to get the win? And, for me, I look at three big things. Number one is to dominate the line of scrimmage. I think both offensively and defensively. If you're Mississippi State, you should have the edge in the trenches. And something I think that I thought a lot about when you talk about this rebuild. And Southern, they're in year one of a rebuild, and there's obviously so much excitement because of all the pieces coming over from Marshall to help that team really a big step forward. But what I keep going back to is I think it's possible in the portal era when you're talking about a complete roster overhaul, which Southern Miss is experiencing. It's like 85 new players or something crazy like that. In this era, it's possible to, in 1 year, bring in good skill talent, especially offensively. You can go out and get talented receivers, talented running backs, but I think defensively as well. Maybe you don't always get a shutdown corner, although they did because they were able to bring Josh Monson with them from Marshall. But you might get some quality safety, some quality linebackers. There's an abundance of players like that available in the portal. You can also go out and bring in a really good quarterback right away, and clearly they did. But even if you didn't have a connection to a Braylon Braxton, going out and attracting a good quarterback in year one of a rebuild is possible because you've got guys like that available in the portal. Reloading the trenches is another story.
Yeah.
I don't think you can do that in one offseason. If you're talking about we have to completely overhaul. If it's a situation where you think, okay, one or two pieces, we're good, then maybe. But when it comes to going after players in the portal, it's really tough to rebuild it for the simple fact that quality offensive and defensive linemen are not in abundance in the portal. And that's because schools recognize how valuable those players are, which means they're taking care of them in the NIL sphere to make sure they hold on to them. That's not to say big-time offensive and defensive linemen don't hit the portal. We see it all the time. But it's not in terms of having guys that can really play, you don't have it to the same rate that you do at all these other positions. And obviously, when you talk about the offensive and defensive line, the reason that's such a big deal is, in terms of not being able to achieve it in the portal, is that's a spot you've got to be able to build up depth. Depth is crucial at those positions. You've got to be able to – fielding an entire starting unit out of the portal is difficult to do. You're definitely not getting depth, but if you're talking about getting a starting 5 or even a starting 4 for a defensive line out of the portal, that's tough to do in one offseason. You might find a couple solid options, but I don't believe in your ability to fully turn that thing over in one offseason. I mean, look, example here's some Finn. Walter Nolan cost Ole Miss $1.3 million for one season. Like, yeah, that's what you're paying for a big-time defensive lineman, and that's one player. Now, one Walter Nolan, defensive line is a little bit different than offensive line because one game wrecker really changes everything. But again, a lot of those guys they're high-value players, and how much can a Southern Miss really be able to go after them? When we talk about the offensive line, even if you felt you were able to go out and get some quality guys, I mean, cohesion matters. Experience matters. Playing together matters when you talk about offensive line success. I say all this to say, yes, Southern Miss did a good job reloading in one offseason, but they are still lacking in the trenches. I know they are concerned about depth on both the offensive and defensive lines. Defensive line, I think they like their starting group, but the depth is a bit of a concern for them. Offensive line, I think they have more questions, and I would also say even if that group ends up being solid, they're in week 1. How long is it going to take that group to come together? They're going to be clicking right away. So when we bring it into Mississippi State, MSU has the same problem. MSU, we saw it last year. They were able to get receivers in. They were able to get a quarterback in. They were able to get a running back. They couldn't get the offensive line down. Well, now State's going into year 2, and we still have questions about the offensive line. But we think State's in a better spot at this point. We think State, we've seen it. They've got the depth. They've got bigger bodies. You feel like State is further along there. Defensive line, it's kind of the same story. I don't know that State's got a game record at D-line, and that's something I think you do ultimately need to have. That's one of those reasons I would still say for the defense, they might still be a year away from really being a group that you can actually win some real games with. But they are further along than where Southern Miss is at. So when you talk about the part of the field where it's most likely going to decide the game, State's got a clear advantage just based on the fact that, one, they should have the advantage regardless because you're an SEC team that spent a bunch of money on a roster. But you also have an edge in the fact that you're in year 2 doing this, they're in year 1. So I think when you talk about the biggest key to this game by far It is dominating with along the line of scrimmage. It is when you're on offense, being able to impose your will in the run game. I don't think they're just going to line up and run the ball just to run the ball, but I think if Southern Miss gives them a look to run into, you should be able to take advantage. And that's something that they weren't able to do consistently last year, even when playing against lesser opponents. So if you have numbers to run the football, Mississippi State should be able to run the football well. On the other side of the ball, State's defensive line should be able to win against the Southern Miss offensive line. You should be able to stuff their run game. You should be able to generate pass rush. If you're not doing both of those things, I'm going to come away concerned because you should have the edge in those categories.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we've talked about it on here before, Andrew. And I think it's a go-to obvious fact of football that size matters. I hear guys all the time like get interviewed for being a great player in a game and say, "Oh, I've been doubted because of my size." Well, yeah. I mean, I hate that happens, but they do look at it as a key factor. Now, is it the biggest thing in the world? Probably not the biggest, but when I look at Mississippi State, especially on um the defensive side, I look at Kedrick Bingley Jones, who's 320 pounds. I look at Jamil Burrows, 330. Will Whitson, we've talked about a couple different guys that I'm mentioning, is 295. They have the depth and skill players. They just have to, and I think you've mentioned it almost every week this off season. At least when we get to the side of defense, as a unit, how do they stack up? How do they perform? And this is a game against Southern Miss where size is going to play a factor. Having those big bodies up front, especially on defense, is going to help them in the trenches to win those battles, to push the Southern Miss offense around. Um, I would hope, however, they want to.
And look, when it comes to the Southern Miss offense, there is the wild card here in that they've got a quarterback that can extend plays with his legs. Braylon Braxton being someone that can run, you have to contend with that a little bit differently. But I do tend to think that if you're Mississippi State, you should be able to have the edge there. And you've also got a guy in Isaac Smith that you think you can lean on to go after and contain a player like Braylon Braxton. So I think your defensive front should be able to have the edge. And then the other side of the ball, offensively, I mean, I kind of look at it this way because we talk about, they're bringing over their defensive coordinator. Seymour comes from Marshall. Marshall's defensive line last season and their linebacking core was better than what I think Southern Miss is trotting out there this year. They 100% are better because they had an NFL player at defensive end. They also had a pair of linebackers that are now at SEC schools, and they lost a couple of their top defensive linemen. And I don't think Southern's defensive line is going to be bad. I think, frankly, by Sun Belt standards, it should probably end up being a solid unit. But I don't think it's going to be as good as the defensive front that Marshall ran out last year. Well, last year's Marshall team got run on a lot.
Yeah.
You could run on them and it wasn't even just I talked about Old Dominion, who runs a very similar offense to what Mississippi State is able to run. They ran all over them. And then I also look at games throughout the season. Really, any opponent they played was able to have a lot of success running the football. And again, I don't think State's just going to run the ball just to run the ball, but I do think State will be able to be more physical with what they're able to do up front. Talking about the State defensive front to the other side of the ball, Sven brings up, we had one, Xavier Hardy was committed, but South Carolina simply offered more money. That has to stop. I will say, and look, I didn't like the loss of Hardy, and that's someone that you thought could step in and be a big-time player. I don't know that he's really going to make an impact at South Carolina this year. I could be dead wrong, but he's not a name that's come up a lot there. And I know Steve Robertson has talked a little bit about that Hardy was not to say that State didn't want him, because State did. But he has made a point that Hardy did not have the production at EMCC that you would have liked to have seen for a guy with his billing, and that he may not have been the same prospect that he was being portrayed as. But look, potential wise, it's there. And yeah, they do have to find a guy to be a big time player along with defensive line. That'll be a thing that's a deciding factor for them when you talk about State defensively. But going back to State's offense, again, I just think the track record is that you should be, even with some of the concerns I have for State's offensive line, the track record is there that you should be able to have success on the ground in this game. And if you do, it's going to help you out and a lot of other factors. That's the biggest key to the game for sure. Two other keys, though. Number two is you've got to limit the explosive plays for Southern Miss's offense. I just talked about that. I think State's defensive front should be able to do what they want to against the Southern Miss offensive front. But what does concern me is that I think Southern's got some good playmakers at receiver, and we know State's got questions in the secondary. And I know this is an offense that Southern's going to run. They're going to want to take those vertical shots down the field. And I think Braxton is a quarterback who can hit them. He's also a guy, as I talked about, can extend plays with his legs. And when you talk about a QB extending plays with his legs, it's not just about him taking off and running. It's about him buying time to get off a play downfield. Southern's chance offensively to put points on the board in this game come from hitting the explosive plays. That's what it's going to boil down to. I do not believe on a play-by-play basis they're going to be able to have much success. It's kind of, as I think about it, I'm watching the South Florida game right now. And South Florida, by the way, runs the same offense Mississippi State runs. It's a different version of it, but probably a more extreme version of it. But it's the Briles offense, which I think Southern Miss is probably about to start running as well. And it's something I've talked about watching this game is at no point have I felt like USF was consistently moving the football. They keep getting stuffed. They just got a big run, but for the most part, they've been getting stuffed. But they've hit some big plays, and that's why they have 31 points on the board and are about to score again. Southern, I kind of feel like it's the same way. As Svez points out, that's why I gave him 20 points. Or Sven, I don't know why. It was a weird pronunciation of his name right there. Yeah, like Southern's chances of putting points on the board are going to come from explosive plays. If you're State, defensively, limit those. I don't think State has to be super aggressive with what they do defensively because I think you have to trust your talent should win out enough that they cannot nickel and dime their way down the field. I think if you're State, you have to trust that as long as we don't let them hit big plays, they don't have much of a chance. Last big key is limiting the mistakes offensively and avoiding negative plays offensively. I look at Mississippi State's offense, and I think they can have a lot of success here. But the things that killed them last season with an offense that is not as talented top to bottom as this one is, they committed a lot of dumb penalties, holding calls, false starts, just getting in the way and preventing positive plays. Turnovers with fumbles and interceptions, taking sacks. Sacks were a killer last year.
Yep.
They cannot have that happen because, again, it's kind of the opposite thing. Like, it's when we talk about the Southern offense versus the State defense. Southern's chance in this game comes down from big plays, explosive plays on offense, and big negative plays against the State when they're playing defense. That is their chance. They cannot trust on a down-by-down basis to stop Mississippi State. They can trust to make game-changing plays with explosive on offense and negative plays on defense. If you're State, you cannot have those negative plays. You have to protect the football. You have to be smart. If you're under pressure, if you're Blake Shapen, get rid of it. Do not take a sack. Do not try to force something that's not there. And by God, offensive line, I cannot live to see another year where every single time a good play happens for State, it's called back for holding. Like, you've got to be locked in. And I know week one, working those things out can be difficult, but you've got to in this game because, look, you're on the road. And if you let those type of plays happen, you're just going to let their crowd get into it, and you're going to make it even more difficult on yourself.
For sure. I look at this game and, I think the only way, and I can't remember if I said this specifically on the show the other night, Andrew, but the only way that Southern Miss wins this game is if Mississippi State does not show up and get off the bus. You know what I'm saying? Like, Southern Miss is, could they be improved this year? Sure. But they're not going to be improved enough to where they could just take out an SEC team like Mississippi State. Now, on the other hand, Mississippi State's going to be improved, but only a slight step up from 2-10. We're talking 4 or 5 maybe if you could find it, 6 wins on the schedule. Mississippi State has got to win in the trenches on defense. They got to get the good pass rush. They got the players to do it. You look at the offensive side of the ball, keep Blake Shapen healthy. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is the only way this game gets competitive for Southern Miss, outside of it being at home for the Eagles and the home crowd environment, it shouldn't be competitive. I don't think it's going to be because I'm a big believer that Southern Miss is going to get off to a good start this year. I don't know if they're going to finish the way they should, but Mississippi State can shoot themselves in the foot in this game. And that's the only reason that Southern Miss has a chance in this matchup, I think. Because there's really not much going for the Eagles.
If State is as improved as they should be,
Yes.
then you are correct. Then going into this game, a loss, it would only happen because you got in your own way. Because you either were not prepared, were not executing, were committing dumb mistakes. That is how a loss would happen if Mississippi State is as improved as they should be. Now, we talked about this right off the start of the show as Finn was bringing it up. If it's a situation where State has not improved all that much and Southern it has taken a big step forward, that's a problem in its own right. There is so I guess there is that path too of what if Mississippi State just ends up being a really bad football team from a talent standpoint once again. That's a whole another problem. But if it's a case of like you don't come out and execute week one, if nothing else, that's something that is correctable, but you better hope that you're
Right.
able to hold on for dear life and survive it and still come away with a win. This needs to be a case though of you come out and you're executing right away and you're just handling business because you've got to give your fan base reason to buy in. You got to give your fan base excitement moving into the next season. I do think State is a genuinely improved team. I do think the talent has improved enough that they should be able to get this win. There should be a talent gap between the SEC and the Sun Belt, 100%. I don't
Yeah.
disagree. And if there's not, there is a huge problem. I think the talent is there, specifically on the line of scrimmage, which I do think will be a determining factor. I think Southern can hit some big plays. But as long as State does not let them hit too many of them and they execute on offense, I think we're walking away with a Bulldogs victory.